Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey writers, welcome to episode 20. Today we're going to talk about a really common refrain that I hear from new writers and even published authors too. And this refrain can kill your creative drive. This also actually came up from more than one of my clients over the past week. So it felt like it was the universe saying it was time to talk about it for the podcast. So I imagine that there is somebody right now listening to this, possibly you, who has thought this recently. And the phrase is, I'm not a real writer. Now, this phrase is sneaky because it's often followed by some variation of because I blank, and that blank is filled with items from 3 different categories: actions, feelings, and thoughts. Now, you can probably guess that I think this whole framework of this list of things that real writers do is super unhelpful, but it's so common and it feels so true for so many of us that I really wanted to take the time and actually address it head on. This thought pattern can also sometimes hide beneath the surface or under a layer of, well, I should do X if I want to succeed. So sometimes you don't actually have the thought, I'm not a real writer, but it's sort of a, well, I should be doing this and I'm not, and therefore I can never get what I want. So sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. It's maybe not always those exact words. I'm going to walk us through those 3 different categories and then share with you a really simple solution for unwinding this unhelpful narrative. So we're going to start with actions because I think these are often the most obvious when it comes to, well, I'm not a real writer, because real writers do blank. So I'll hear things like, well, real writers write every day. And they write at least 1,000 words at a time. And they read a ton. They read like 50 pages a day. And they work for hours, like 2 to 3 hours on their books every single day. They're always getting new ideas all the time. They're really good at plotting their books before they write them. They love their characters above all else. And their characters actually talk to them. And they want to spend all of their time in their story, and they always write first thing in the morning, and they go on writing retreats, and they don't take sick days, and they are just perfect all the time. So there's this on and on and on, this huge list. And as you're listening, there are probably things that you would add that you've thought before. And there also are probably things on that list that you're like, who thinks that? Like, I never considered that was even a thing that real writers should do. Yet none of the things either on that list or that are in your own head are required to call yourself a real writer. Sometimes instead of like actions that writers are taking, we'll use external measures of accomplishment to determine if we think someone, usually ourselves, can count as a real writer. So maybe you think, well, you have to have an agent, or you have to be published, or at least have a book deal, or, only trad published and not indie, or you have to have won awards. And we sort of use those things to say you have to have these before you count. And again, we most often use this against ourselves rather than other people. And I will argue that none of those things are required either. And we'll use myself as an example for a moment, since most people would probably agree that I am a quote unquote real writer because I have 3 books out with a trad publisher plus a novella. Books are translated into multiple languages. I want you just to consider, did getting my very first offer of representation from an agent, did that suddenly change the quality of my writing? Did I have less skill or less worth as a writer in the hour before I got an offer on my debut novel versus the hour after? Of course not. It wasn't those milestones that made me a writer. And it's not writing every day that makes me a writer. I've certainly never once in the 10 years that I've been writing written 365 days in a year. Not one time in 10 years. Not even close. Being a quote unquote real writer is as simple and as challenging as deciding that you are one, and no matter what. And then writing in some fashion, in some way that actually works for you, with no sort of qualifications of it has to be this much or this kind. So we're not going to go down that path quite yet, because I still want to look at the thoughts and feelings that some folks will assume that real writers have to have or embody. So let's look at those real quick. So often from newer writers, I'll hear things like, well, a real writer trusts themselves, trusts their story instincts. They don't feel much doubt or any doubt at all. They're really comfortable with messy first drafts, or maybe they simply don't have messy first drafts, depending on who you ask. They believe in themselves 100%. They believe in their stories. A real writer enjoys writing more than they enjoy anything else. They think about their stories all the time. They never worry that their story is broken beyond repair. They don't have any mental drama about their work, which, as a side note, is just so hilariously untrue. Based on all of the writers that I know, we are truly masters at having drama about our stories and our skills and our prospects. We are so good at drama. Well, there's also, I'll hear new writers think that, a real writer has to enjoy every part of the process. Again, your list of things that you believe a real writer should have might be different, and the actual list itself is so much less important than the origin of the list, where it comes from, and then of course the solution, because we want to just not sit with these things and recognize that we're thinking them. We also want to do something about it. So with all of these different sort of shoulds, but with all of these, whether it's what we believe real writers think or do or feel, they almost always come from one of two places. So it's either advice that you've heard other writers say, such as this is often where the, you have to write every day thing comes from, or these milestones that we put in place come from looking at our own process and just deciding that somehow it's wrong. So that second version is the one that I find the most insidious and often ends up overlapping with the advice bit, because it tends to be we think is lacking in ourselves, and then we sort of create advice around it that gets perpetuated over time. So we're going to dig into this. When we look at our own writing process and we decide that what we're doing is wrong, what we do is we create this image of a quote unquote real writer, and that real writer, they do things differently than we do. They do them perfectly. And different here almost always means they do it better. So what we do when we're looking at this is we're taking what we do and saying, well, a real writer doesn't do any of these things. They do these other things. And that separates ourselves from our desire to claim the title of writer. So we make ourselves wrong instead of looking for the proof of what is going well, or just the proof that we love writing. And then we pretend that all this proof is a fact of the universe, and therefore we are not a valid writer, and we're doomed and we should quit. But the thing is, this is not a fact. The universe does not hand out certificates of writing validity. I can speak. I know words. I'm a writer. You, my friend, are the only one who gets to decide if you are a real writer and what counts as a real writer. Now, as always, I do want to point out that this isn't a personal failing on your part if you've been doing this. This is not a reason to pile shame on top of your not good enough feelings. Society very much conditions us to look for our flaws and find all the places where we are falling short of the sort of set societal standards. And then even when we achieve success, especially for those socialized as women or who are part of other marginalized groups or intersections thereof, we're taught to sort of wave away our success. We're taught to focus on, well, so-and-so helped me and I had this thing and it was actually just lucky, and we really diminish our role into something that was really insignificant instead of, being the person who sat down every day and wrote. And while yes, not every day, I will also just sort of see how that slipped out. We just, write every day. Nope, that's not required. It's just said so often that it sort of becomes part of our vernacular. But with all that said, we can certainly acknowledge the places where we hold privilege and how that helps us in our achievement of goals. But that doesn't mean we have to wash away all of the ways we've worked to intentionally create this result for ourselves. So we can look at this like, there are people who have very similar, if not, ostensibly the same mixture of privileges and marginalizations. Of course, there's always going to be variations, but generally you can find people who have the same sort of mix of things. And there are people who succeed and people who don't. It's not determinant of what you're going to achieve, but it can certainly play a role, and we can acknowledge that and also own our role in creating it also. I think I said also way too many times. The thing is, we are complex creatures. We can hold these multiple truths at the same time. We can doubt our abilities and believe that we can be published or reach whatever milestone is sort of next on your list. Because I know there's folks listening to this who are brand new writers and folks who are multi-published, bestsellers, award winners. I'm trying to make sure I cover the whole spectrum. Because this affects us at every level. It doesn't just magically go away as we achieve more. We have to intentionally unwind these things and sort of reprogram our brain to look for the positive and look for where we are doing well instead of looking for all the ways we think we are inadequate, which is our brain likes to do. And so kind of on that note, we can feel like a fraud and also like a genius. We can feel those different days, different times, one second and then the other. It's all part of being human. With all of that said, what do we do when our brain is really committed to believing that we're not a real writer? When our brain is like, look, okay, I can be on your side with this whole we don't have to write every day thing, but here's all the reasons why I'm actually not a real writer and you're full of shit and I'm actually the worst. And I guarantee there's at least one of you thinking that, and I promise you you're not correct. Okay, so what do we do? Our brain's being a butthole. What do we do? First, we're going to actually go ahead and write down the list of reasons that our brain is saying that we're not a real writer. So like I did earlier in the episode, just like make a list. Is it about the frequency of how often you write? Is it because of the level of doubt you have? Is it because of the level of drama in your brain? Is it because it doesn't feel easy enough? Whatever it is, go ahead and get it all down on paper or typed up into your phone or computer. However you do it, just get it out of your head where it just torments you and put it somewhere that you can examine it a little bit from a distance. So now that you have this list, there are also likely some that you're going to read and be like, okay, actually, I think that because everybody says it, but I don't actually believe it. So those ones you can just cross out. But the ones where you're like, yeah, I do think real writers do these things, I want you to ask for each one separately. Sort of you can, put paper on either side and just look at them one at a time, or however you want to kind of do it to focus in on that one particular thing and ask, do I think that every single successful published author does this thing? Or whatever your sort of metric is that you think like, if you're published, you're real, whatever that sort of metric is for you, does every single one of those successful /published /whatever authors, do they do this? Does every single one do this? Every single real author, real writer. Or you can put it another way. You can say, look again at that thing you think that real writers do and think, is it possible that there's at least one real writer /published author / whatever you have sort of made your thing who doesn't do this? Is there at least one who doesn't and is yet still successful? Now, there is a good chance that your brain is going to go, okay, yes, there's probably one person who doesn't do this. And when you have that little opening, that little bit of like wiggle room, you can push it a little bit further. So if it is possible that there are real writers who don't do this thing, is it possible that I could also be a real writer? And just see where that gets you. See if that gets you a little bit further. I suspect it will. And I'm going to give you these questions again, a little bit more simply, instead of all of my little / caveats here. Again, look at your list. Do I think every single real writer does this? Or you can think, is it possible that at least one real writer doesn't do this thing? Those are the two questions. You can also sort of put like your favorite author who you really look up to in that sphere and say like, does so-and-so, is it possible that this person doesn't write every single day? And if you're like, yeah, probably. They probably take some days off. And then you can say, okay, if that's true, can it also be true that I can be a real writer who doesn't write every day? And it might take little steps to sort of wiggle into that, because your brain might go, well, yeah, but they write most days and I only write, 2 days a week. You can probably your brain likes to get tricky and be like, yeah, but. You can still be, okay, fine. Do I think that there is some published author out there, some real writer who only writes 2 days a week and yet is still manages to be successful. You can sort of just keep playing with it until you find a sort of path, be like, okay, yes, I can believe, or I can at least be open to believing that I count as a real writer. Now, if you want to take this work deeper and really be able to own that identity as a writer, I invite you to work with me. I start all of my clients with a free consultation call where we'll chat on Zoom and identify your unique specific challenges in your writing life. And then we create a custom plan to help you fall in love with writing, create with more joy, and say goodbye to burnout. So if you want to look into that, and you should, you can click the link in the show notes to schedule your consultation. And also, speaking of links in the show notes, if you're listening to this before June 6th of 2022, there is a really fun giveaway going on that I have a link for you to enter. I've partnered with InfoStack for the Write, Publish, Profit stack of goodies for writers that's going to be given out starting in June 7th. So they're doing this really cool giveaway in the lead up to that where they're giving away 10 really great writing books, including titles like Story Genius by Lisa Cron, which is a personal favorite of mine, at least the first half. The plotting part in the back half confuses my brain, but I love the first half. It also includes On Writing by Stephen King, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and 7 more, if I did that math correctly. So you'll definitely want to check that out if it's before June 6th when you're listening to this. They're also giving away some other things too for the grand prize winner, so all the details are in the link. And then next week, I'll actually get to tell you about the actual Write, Publish, Profit stack that InfoStack has put together. And I've included one of my courses in that bundle. So you get tons of cool, access to writing software and programs and ebooks and all sorts of cool stuff. So I'll tell you more about that next week. And I also have a fun interview with some really cool, amazing writers next week as well. So it's going to be good stuff. So I will see you all next week. Happy writing. If you enjoyed this podcast, then you've got to get on my email list. You'll get my best advice sent right to your inbox with concrete steps on how to stay in love with writing and banish burnout for good. Go to isabelsterling.com/join to sign up. When you do, you'll get one of my favorite worksheets, the 5 causes of writer's block. I teach you how to diagnose why you're stuck and how to get writing again. That's isabelsterling.com/join. See you next week.